Assalamu alaikum, my curious Caucasoid kin, for we are gathered here today to learn about and pay our respects to our Creator, the divine cashew cranium that spawned us, nurtured us, and made us fundamentally who we are. As the inheritors of his divine will and mandate, as wayward sons of Patmos, we marched on and forged the world in our, and by extension his, image. Let's have a look at the lore behind a mythical, magical, and absolutely real, I promise, figure from ancient history. A figure responsible for inventing white people. He is the father, and the first of the whites, the master technologist, the Black Bane, Hammerhead. He is Yakub. Please leave a like and a comment on this video because it really helps me in the algorithm. You smell that? That crisp waft of change in the air? It smells good, doesn't it? Well, that is no sensory mirage, my dearest viewer, for that is today's sponsor, Fume. Fume is the premier in flavoured air devices, with a long and well-earned pedigree in making sweet suckle sticks to slobber on healthily. Let me tell you about it. Fume is a high-quality flavoured air device that aims to help you kick that one bad habit for good. It uses no vapour, nicotine or batteries and is housed in a classy chassis of rock-hard wood. And let me tell you, nothing feels as good as putting hard wood in your mouth and having it blow inside your mouth. It's positively scrumptious. With a variety of flavours like orange vanilla and crisp mint, alongside having satisfying fidget capabilities, Fume is the ideal tool needed to finally overcome that one vice that has been tormenting you constantly. Like me and my doorknob addiction. My vice of late has been licking and sucking on a wide array of doorknobs and handles in both public and private. You see, I like to imagine myself... I like to imagine myself as a little fish skittering along the seabed, scooping up an assortment of plankton and other such yummy critters. And putting them in my big fat stop laughing, you're putting me off. And putting them in my big fat grumbly tummy. That was before Fume entered the fray and gave me something else to suck and lick instead, kicking my habit and bringing me back into complete lucidity. Thank you, Fume. So grab that manky old vape and stick it into a Large Hadron Collider, because with Fume there is a better path. Join over 300,000 customers in treading a better path today. Scan the QR code or go to tryfume.com and use code Dankula at the checkout for a free topper with your journey pack. That is tryfume.com with code Dankula at checkout. And now, thankfully, back to the video. Now, before we get into this divine truth, we must first go over some context about those who initially recounted it. The Nation of Islam, who, for context, is a black supremacist scion of enlightened truth seekers that is neither a nation nor Islamic. But this Yakub figure is a key character in their pseudo-religion or cult or whatever the hell you want to call it. Without going all in on the esoteric pseudo-Afro-Turkisms of the Nation of Islam, because that would very quickly spiral into a auditory Hyperborea edit, all we have to focus and lock in on is our man of the hour. His legend or his saga of sorts, to which there are two mainline interpretations. First, we have the original texts, as proclaimed by the high clerics within the Nation of Islam. This is the most well-ascribed and the most trad retelling of the legend of Yakub, though not without some deep-seated mistruths. Then there is the outright apocryphal rendition as told by the Nuwaubian heresy, who were seemingly smoking that Hubbard pack when coming up with their stupid cosmo-chemitist fanfictions. Despite this childish attempt to rewrite the glorious cosmic truth of our peanut head progenitor, they did seemingly stumble upon some true facts by complete accident. But we'll get into all of that later. Now, I'll go over the original story and then a brief aside about the Nuwaubian pish. And then I'll actually tell you the real story, because I have spent the last 17 years researching this in depth, taking multiple expeditions to sites all over the world, like Birmingham, dragging supposed historians into my van for debriefings. I've been taking a stem cell routine for a decade. I can speak fucking Altaic. My synapses are so fucking dense and tensile that you could use them for bungee jumping. They call me Glue Boy because I stick together entire fields of study with my thorough and cutting research. I've spelunked so deep into the archives of the School of Hard Knocks that hip-hop superstar, literotica writer and anal hygiene enthusiast Tariq Nasheed has me blocked on Twitter. But we'll also get into that later. I know every major field engagement in the Fenno-Korean Hyperwar by heart, including every picket engagement during the not well-known Siege of Ulaanbaatar. I know the name of every ship present during the sinking of the Turco-Bosnian flagship Rumveta, and every single battle which utilised the highly immoral penal legions called Slavs. Will I bring up anything to do with the Hyperwar? No, I won't, but this is to say that I have been neck-deep in truthery for a good while now. I am an authority on this subject, and that I frankly wasted so much time delving into an ancient war with untranslated documents so old that I had to relearn English twice, and that I need to stop myself from wincing in fear at the terms Fingolia, Juan, or Magyaristan. So, flashing my numerous credentials aside, let's get on to the account of Yakub, according to the Nation of Islam. Our story begins 66 trillion years ago on the moon. Yes, really, where there apparently once lived 13 tribes of black people, all living in peace and harmony in a heavenly garden. However, Eden never lasts, as a scornful god scientist felt frustrated with these jovial blacks, for you see, they didn't speak the same language. They were fractured and divided by their own tongues, deciding to presumably come up with fun and interesting slang and localisms for each other, which isn't very wholesome. As such, in a presumed tard rage, this scientist destroyed the fucking moon. And as a consequence, scattered these divine melanated moonfolk across the earth, leaving the black homeland a charred and ashen husk. One such tribe that was exiled to earth was known as the Shabazz, led by, you guessed it, Shabazz, who, upon landing on the earth, decided to settle it first in the Nile Valley and then to the Arabian Peninsula. Of course, like any tribe, once it hit critical mass, it decided to splinter, with the leader of the tribe, Shabazz himself, leading a scion of his most loyal followers to settle the interior of Africa, presumably around the Congo Delta. Why? Well, you see, he believed that the tribe's technologically advanced society was eroding their souls, and as such, he wanted to return to a societally primitive yet spiritually pure and mentally toughened state. He was the first Kaczynski, if you will. As such, he left behind his decadent and degenerate kin in Arabia to fester and collapse under their own tech-induced hedonism. And he set out to secure the future. It was out here in the sweltering jungles of the Congo that they started to physically ascend, and they evolved into higher beings, gaining what we would stereotypically call black physiognomy and features, with even their silken and straight hair drying and frizzing into the modern afro, due to their bodies adapting to conserve water and be overall more efficient. Unlike the wasteful and decadent straight hairs that plague the modern ice dwellers. And thus, we truly begin around 4000 BC, in the black city of Mecca, where Yakub, praise be upon him, was born. A bright yet arrogant child, he was very often derided and ridiculed for his strange case of macrocephaly, being given the shameful nickname of Big Head. Despite this, however, he pressed on, and by the age of 6, he had learned the law of attraction and repulsion by observing steel magnets. The children and other adults thought that he was just an ugly and stupid child that was merely playing with chunks of metal before presumably eating them. But in truth, he was analytically studying, because he was a smart boy with a big head. And fun fact, his big head actually worked way more than all of those other sneering skull cells. It was here, watching magnets repel and attract, that an epiphany struck Yakub. He could create a race of beings who could attract the black man, beguile and then dominate them as they so righteously deserved for making fun of his bean-shaped skull. By the age of 18, Yakub had managed to learn every single thing that the multiple black universities in Mecca had to teach, taking every subject and getting presumed straight A's all across the board. And he went into studies about what made the black man so great and perfect and high IQ and good at jiving musical rhyming games, to which Yakub discovered the presence of a black germ and a brown germ. This warranted more vigorous and regimented study. As such, Yakub gathered and indoctrinated his 59,999 acolytes and went north into the hitherto unsettled frontier, settling on the island of Palan, or as we know it today, Patmos in Greece. Once there, he established what could only be described as a melanocratic technocracy, with himself as the unopposed dear leader. This state's objective, to experiment and breed out the blackness of all of his disciples. His methodology? Chucking dark-skinned babies off of cliffs. He did this for 200 years. This selective breeding resulted in the birth of the brown race, the broader terms for groups like Indians, Mayans, Malays, Aboriginals, and Italians. Of course, more work was to be done, though Yakub, peace be upon him, wasn't going to be around to go through with it, dying at the young age of 150 years old. But ever loyal to their master, who literally mass murdered their parents and children over many, many generations, they pressed on with the whitening, chucking the swarthiest of their children into the ocean like skipping stones. As such, after 600 years, they had finally managed it. They managed to create the first ever white man. Yakub's dream had finally come to fruition, though it was not without its side effects, as due to the eugenic hell that was their home, they had, as a result, gained a cold, callous, and vicious character, unlike the angelic, erudite, and peace-loving black folk of the Shabazz. Just like the brown race, there were other failed variants of the program, like the yellow and red races, which you would think would be fairly self-explanatory for what they are, but apparently the yellow race isn't Asians, because they're black, believed to share a common ancestor with the Moors and, by extension, the 13 lunar tribes. But enough of that side character malarkey. What of the whites? Well, some of the milkskins were self-aware enough to realise that they were demonic spawn without souls nor the touch of black divinity. As such, they themselves tried to return to blackness. But because they were low IQ, backwards and without an ounce of soul, they failed, transforming into what we now consider modern chimps, monkeys and other such sub-simians. Those whites who did not go monkey mode and instead embraced their inner evil decided that their path was one of rape, plunder and carnage, and as such they went south to march on Mecca, to which they were immediately repelled by the Shabazi Praetorian Guard and subsequently deported en masse to a penned-off black site in modern Europe, under perimeter watch from constant Shabazi patrols to keep these talcum tyrants at bay, and the civilised world safe. As such, the white man was forced to become introspective and dwell upon his original sin. In time, he devolved into a beast, even more feral than an animal, eating raw meat, hunting naked, and living in caves whilst whistling and finger painting with doo-doo. But you see, the black man has one glaring weakness. A weakness that would bring about their downfall. Their compassion and kindness. As one black man by the name of Moses tried to civilise the chalkwalkers, teaching them how to bathe, wear clothes and season their food. But sadly, it was all for naught, as Moses quickly realised that these ashen abominations were anathema to civility. As such, he gathered 300 of the most troublesome of whites and promptly liquidated them by luring them into a pit and throwing dynamite at them. We have had a wild time researching this video. However, this merely delayed the inevitable, as Yakub's high-end genetic encoding had started to manifest through epigenetic triggers, resulting in the white man's unholy ability in tricknology. Like an entire species' third eye opening all at once, a dark enlightenment to eclipse the earth in pain and misery. What is tricknology? My, I'm very sorry, I forgot that the average prole isn't acclimated to discussing such abstract high concepts. Tricknology is a psychoneurological weapon ingrained in all beings that is used to lie, cheat and steal from the well-meaning. It is a powerful tool that for most will wear away at them spiritually and physically. Like Emperor Palestine when he shoots lightning out of his fingers at Mace Dindu. But for the white devils, they don't degrade like normal people, primarily due to the fact that they have no souls to degrade, meaning that they can use tricknology willy-nilly, without fear of withering away into a mean raisin man. The white man used his penchant for technology to subsequently bring the world to its knees, taking advantage of black altruism to siphon resources into Europe and in the process destabilising the literal black markets, weaponising said altruism alongside careful narrative control to instill black guilt and secure the white man as an oppressed yet valiant underdog that means no harm and is actually misunderstood, we promise. And then heartlessly plunging a dagger into the black man when his back was turned. And then, without hesitation, enslaving the black race and in the process setting the world back billions of years. It was prophesied that the sons of Yakub, praise be upon him, would reign over the earth for 6,000 years before the black man would retake his throne. That year officially came and went in 1914, and well, you know the rest from there. I'm just saying, Woodrow Wilson's hubris was prophesied. Now, obviously, a lot of this is quite well established and elementary, with this being the orthodox creation myth taught in most reputable white mud huts. But for the sake of thoroughness, I did need to cover it, as it's only with the widest possible lens that we can even attempt to see the truth for what it really is. Though you've probably noticed that in my retelling it contained a lot more details than are in the textbooks. I am, after all, a scholar on this subject, and let's just say that I have special access to a wide range of archives and insights, most of which were revealed to me in an endocrine fast-induced dream. But we'll get to that later. The point being, I absolutely promise that I am not throwing in some extra stuff that I completely made up because I think it's funny. So now, we must cover the fanfiction interpretation of the story from our Kangs of the Cosmos, the Nuwaubian nation. The Nuwaubians are very simply the Mormons of the Nation of Islam, being kooky characters who took a perfectly rational and obvious truth and twisted it into an absurd parody worth nothing more than an ironic and overly edited fancam. Without wasting my, and by extension your time by telling you the detailed history of their stupid little clique, all you need to know is that it goes back to the Egyptian-Ottoman War of 1839, with the Nation of Islam loyalists being the Ottomans and the Nuwaubian separatists being the Egyptians, and that the founder of this sect, Dwight D. York, was convicted for several counts of child molestation and tax fraud. According to this completely unserious splinter group, the first black people were in fact not from the moon. I know, what absolute idiots. But they were instead a race of deities from an entirely separate galaxy. They were apparently called Rizikians from the planet Rizq. And they orbited a tri-solar system, that means 3 suns orbiting each other, and their capital was a mammoth starship known as the Nibiru. Despite being literal gods, they were still vassals to an even more supreme being, who I would assume is Allah because, of course. So how and why did these cosmic kangs fall from the heavens down to our little clump of dirt and shit that we call Earth? Well, that is a doozy, because you see, due to the nature of the 3 suns trinary system, basking heat, light and other such shite over their original homeworld, it would be a somewhat non-ideal place to live, if not for its atmosphere. Kind of like the situation on our planet, but multiplied by 3, because that is how math works. But anyways, Allah was having a beef with another god called Shaitan on the planet, with Allah requesting that he vacate the planet for probably being an uppity and fly motherfucker. Simply put, Shaitan refused and started having a shit fit, resulting in a scrap breaking out between the 2 deities and an explosion akin to a hydrogen bomb going off that was strong enough to make the planet's atmosphere evaporate. So, not good. Though, of course, in time the Rizikians were able to concoct a plan to repair their homeworld's atmosphere. Gold. They boarded the Nibiru and they scoured space for gold, resulting in their coming across our mineral-rich and settleable little rock. Of course, they were deities, mind you. They weren't just going to do a hard day's work and extract the minerals themselves. That would be demeaning and well below their station. As such, they genetically modified the genome of the Homo erectus and created a labouring slave race to mine the gold for them. These mongrel cavern dwellers were, as you may intuit, the progenitors of modern humanity. But with some caveats. For example, due to the fact that these homos were genetically modified using the Rizikians' own genetics to splice and interweave with theirs, as a result they naturally all became black and had psychic powers. But the thing is though, giving melanated proto-grugs telekinesis will result in an already violent offshoot of mammal becoming an even bigger problem than usual. One that can float and crush elephants' heads with their obtuse and wrinkly melon minds. This is not exactly an ideal activity for your mongrel race of untouchable chimps to partake in. As such, after Cain murdered Abel, the Rizikians decided that enough was enough and calcified their pineal glands en masse, which we all know is the source of humanity's latent psionic abilities. Shut up, yes, you do know exactly what I mean. Do not try and play dumb. My third eye sees right through your shite, you contrarian non-believer. However, due to the fractal nature of humanity, certain tribes managed to evade the wrath of the angels, and as such, diverged into their own sub-races, just like in Elder Scrolls, including one tribe called the Shayug. These beings were one of the last remnants of psycho-homos, being easily identifiable with their mighty stature, averaging around 7 to 9 feet tall, and the fact that they have engorged coffee bean heads that housed a dual array of brains. And the only reason that they managed to escape the Rizikian rapture was the fact that they dwelled in caverns outside of, you guessed it, Mecca. And yes, you assumed correctly, Yakub is indeed a Shayug, according to the Nuwab, not a Shabazz. So he was blessed with 2 normal-sized brains as opposed to a comically large singular one. Thus, it is no surprise that such actions by the Cecil Rhodes Johnsons in the sky, doing their mass psychic sterilization, presumably caused Yakub to have a bit of a chip in his shoulder, not even taking into account the expulsion to Agartha. As such, he utilised his grand intellect to gene-splice a bioweapon into existence. A weapon to unleash upon the Rizikians. A weapon to surpass Metal Gear. The White Man. Apparently, upon completing his weapons program, Yakub had a bit of an Oppenheimer moment, being so taken aback by the horrors of his craftsmanship and being so violently racked with regret and guilt that one of his 2 brains had a Flickergoon-esque brain aneurysm and exploded, resulting in his death. Now, I can't believe I have to say this, but almost none of that was real. The vast majority of the Nuwaubian chapter is nothing more than an exercise in the creativity of a bored and jaded non-believer who merely wants to see how much shit he can get away with making up before people catch on to his devilish schemes and plots. This was a true exercise in technology, and obviously the original orthodox version is the one that we like and the one that is 100% real. Despite this, either through genuine insights or just complete coincidence, they did indeed manage to include some truths that were even omitted from the standard national doctrine. Either way, the Nuwabs are not to be taken seriously, regardless of their lucky strikes. Now, at this point in the video, I'll start giving my 2 cents on our creator's origin story. And if I were your standard talcaloid pastewog, I would either be one of those gimps that would outright deny the infallibility of Yakub, peace be upon him, or waffle on about how the truth is somewhere in between these 2 interpretations. Ooh, the accounts are all conjecture and biased. We need to read between the line-arinos. I'm very smart and rational. Shut the fuck up, you slobbering Reddit filth. Get off of that fucking fence and actually commit to reality. Either open all 3 of your eyes and accept the infallible truth, or shut the fuck up and keep living in cuckoo fantasyland where you can reason your way through life and where society is completely honest and forthcoming with information. Venom aside, I've not only read the studies, I wrote half of them as well. To the point that even the orthodoxy of the Nation of Islam starts seething at me. Case in point, Tariq Nasheed. Me and Tariq Nasheed were actually arguing on Twitter a long time ago, and he told me that the original true Scottish people were an ancient race of black pygmy dwarves. I called him a fucking and he blocked me. He is a non-believer and not to be trusted, but that's enough ranting. So let's get on to the main appeal and start from, well, the start. Buckle in, boys, this is a doozy, and remember, all of this is completely real. I promise. 200 million years ago, there was nothing. Until a higher dimensional gestalt entity known to us today as Allah decided to utilise extreme neurophysics to seed the known universe with life, creating our solar system and placing within it the 13 tribes of Al-Lunis on what we would now call the Moon. Why 13? Well, you wouldn't get it. But all I will say is that it vaguely relates to esoteric geometry, psychonumerism and Gnosticism a la the Hounds of Tindalos. I mean, obviously. Al-Lunas, an idyllic paradise world shepherded by the dominant and divinely ordained Shabazz dynasty, being the tribe with the highest concentration of Vril, they were, of course, black and had mighty strong psychic fields, being able to float and peel fruit with their mind. But of course, there was one thing that most of them lacked that would only be gained through fire and suffering. Humility. As one of the Shabazz, a young gendarme by the name of Yeshua, aspired to be more than a mere psychic immortal, melanated demigod. He wished to be like Allah. As in, all of that stuff minus the demi part. As such, he gathered the strongest of the 13 tribes, who by this point were in a perennial ennui due to the boredom and decadence of infinite bliss. Because, as it turns out, paradise is boring. He brought them to a secluded mountain and constructed a mighty space elevator to escape the gravity well of the moon, in an attempt to commune with and become equals with Allah, and perhaps kill him if he pipes up and objects. Of course, this plan wasn't exactly popular, with the loyal, virtuous, and big-dicked Al-Lunasites finding out about the Yeshuan's plan and being so disgusted by the idea of disturbing the demiurge's beauty sleep that they besieged the tower and engaged the traitorous goons all across the planet. This is a cascade of events that became known as the Al-Lunasari Cosmokrieg. This conflict was very costly, with the war centering around the siege of Babylon space elevator, which conservative estimates have lasting around 650 years, though eventually the defences did crack. Babylon fell when a breakthrough was achieved by the current de facto leader of the Al-Lunasari loyalists named Muhammad, of prophetic fame. He broke through the defences of the tower by utilising his exceptionally strong psychic fields to imitate active camouflage akin to Halo Elite. He managed to secure the choke point at Theodosia and unlock its gate. Following a further 23 years, slowly fighting up the elevator inch by inch, he finally had a standoff with the corrupted and power-hungry Yeshua. Upon engaging in a game of fisticuffs, Yeshua, in his infinite cowardice, fled the scene via VTOL, though his escape was cut short when he was shot down by a flak cannon. Though, in the end, he had the last laugh, as he not only survived the crash, but managed to escape the clutches of the loyalist kill team and make it off-world. How he managed to do this is up to interpretation, taking his gallimaufry of surviving acolytes with him, fleeing to Earth. However, due to the haphazard nature of their escape, they crash-landed in what was at the time Laurasia, in the Pangaean supercontinent. Whilst the Yeshuan exiles were covering their tracks and retreating to the vast cave networks beneath Laurasia, those left behind on the moon were being massacred by the Al-Lunasites en masse, though not before initiating a self-destruct sequence on the Babylon space elevator, setting off explosives at the base of the tower with an estimated yield of 450 megatons, or, in normal terms, 4 times the strength of the Tsar bomber, which, alongside atomizing the elevator, completely burst the planetoid's atmosphere and nullified the moon's rotational axis, wiping out all life on it and tidally locking it to the Earth, thus leaving it as the lifeless husk that we know today. The former site of the Babylon space elevator can be seen today as the Shackleton crater, with the dust and debris from the blast being kicked up into the orbit of the Earth in mighty plumes, eventually scattering into the planet's atmosphere, blotting out the sun and resulting in the extinction of the dinosaurs. Of course, almost everyone present during the fall of Al-Lunas was obliterated. But that's the thing. Almost everyone. And I'm not just talking about the Yeshuans. Muhammad managed to get off-world alongside the remnants of the Lunar 13. As such, when they touched down on Earth, they had consolidated into a new tribe, the Mohammedans, setting up a forward operating base in Gondwanaland. Though, with their numbers so heavily depleted and with scant little in terms of supplies and the encroachment of an ice age, they had to go native, essentially playing Minecraft IRL. Settling in what we would know today as the Halib Triangle, the now 800-year-old Muhammad established Kemet, expanding their borders and settling most of the modern Arab world with the first humans, who were all black, by the way. Fast forwarding millions of years with Kemet expanding out across Africa and the Middle East, unopposed and entering an eons-long golden age. However, when a Kemetic pioneering outfit comes across an anomaly at the Bosphorus Strait, their days of peace and tranquility were numbered. Remember how I said that the Yeshuans crash-landed and hid underground in caves? Well, they had gotten up to some shenanigans in the few million years since we last saw them. And that was a very, very long time. I mean, the continents had all now formed and shit. But we'll ignore all of that for the sake of narrative storytelling. Yeshua led his rebels underground after crash-landing in modern-day Scotian, Slovenia, where the impact of the ship hitting the ground carved out a mighty hole into the earth that became the famed cave network. Upon settling in the newly created underground network, he immediately established a tyrannical dictatorship, rounding up all the remaining women present and taking them as his wives. He then proceeded to take the weakest of his men and enslave them, buck-breaking them repeatedly to make them docile and to steal their psychic powers. Yes, I'm being serious, he actually did that. Source? Me. I'm the source. I wrote the fucking book in this field. All of that aside, he spent the next few thousand years ruling his subterranean hellscape with an iron fist. Though a problem was quickly presenting itself. Yeshua was getting older, aging quicker due to his soul eroding with every evil deed that he chose to partake in. Indeed, he needed a successor. So, he got to work. He went through a routine of knocking up one of his many wives, having a child be born, and then liquidating the child via Gauss cannon for desirable traits like cunning, deception, intellect, and guile, as well as yodeling capabilities, because yodeling at the right frequency actually causes extreme distress to black people, alongside harvesting stem cells to slow down aging. He then proceeded to inject said traits into the next iteration of the birth cycle via advanced gene modding and eugenics. He killed the ugly ones. Repeat this novel process over thousands of generations and you have what records, me, call the Shaitan program. This, paired with the dead wives and cucked and bucked slaves having their synapses harvested to be pulled and wired into a biological supercomputer to help record keep, administrate and stroke his ego, results in a really big fucking problem developing. By the time Yeshua was on his deathbed at 451,000 years young, all that remained of his rebellion was two people. And you know, the massive interwoven and supercooled tumour tower inside the underground lake, which consisted of himself and one more slave who was with child. Upon going into labour, the mother went inside the conveniently human-sized USB port in the supercomputer and entered the body horror HAL 9000 for liquidation and processing. Yeshua exerted the last of his strength to follow suit inside, at which he succeeded in getting subsumed by the mass. After which, Shaitan went into incubation for a few million years before finally completing its computations just months before our Kemetic pioneers, the massive brain shrank and receded, settling in the skull of a fully formed man's body. Too large to be housed in a standard skull, it needed to bulge out, like a shitty Dell Office computer that just got a 2K graphics card stuck inside of it. It is now at long last that we witness the birth of Yakub, praise be upon him, absorbing and assimilating the memories, personalities and grudges of the millions of minds fed into his synaptic stew. So, to the surprise of absolutely no one, he had a bit of a chip on his shoulder when it came to the old enemies of Al Lunis. But to once more wage war on Muhammad, who he assumed would be dead by now, but having an IQ of 1,600, he planned accordingly, he needed an army. So he collected the leftover hollowed out corpses and he got to work. And now we come back to the committee, who were at the Bosphorus Strait. And what did they find? Well, they found a mass grave, which might not seem that earth-shattering if not for the fact that they were meant to be the only humans on the planet. So, that was a bit of a big revelation. And the bodies they found didn't look right. They were yellow. Indeed, they had just come across the first failed models of Asians, who were being field tested in the Aegean Sea to try and optimise their buoyancy and stress test their durability against contemporary ballistics. Spoiler alert, this generation wasn't adequately amphibious or bulletproof, so they got put against the wall, shot, and then dumped in a pit. The committee then very quickly became aware of the presence of abhuman monsters to the north, and as such, set up a DMZ on the Bosphorus and started doing armed expeditions into what we call Eurasia, establishing a Great Wall going up the Don River and settling the east with fortress cities stretching across Siberia. So what's the deal with the Asians in the Aegean? Well, Yakub, praise be upon him, was trying to create an army of psionically voided slaves capable of combating the Mohammedan offshoots by being walking and talking psychic dampeners, which is a force multiplier big enough to actually put the malformed savages on equal footing with Kemet. You see, Yakub was harvesting genetic data off of the remains of his former slaves to use as blueprints for the slave army. The issue, however, is that these bones were millions of years old by this point, and as such they were faulty and incomplete. As such, he filled in the gaps of the genome with limescale, thus producing the off-peach hue, bugman behaviour, ravenous hunger that is iconic to the Asian race that we all know and sort of love. An interesting side effect, however, is that the limescale calcified their pineal glands, making them physically incapable of spirituality, and therefore locking them out of enlightenment for eternity. The Asians coped subconsciously by adopting beliefs about reincarnation. These Asians were cast off in waves eastwards and southwards in hordes to settle the unclaimed land and destabilise the already settled Kemetic frontiers, who by this point were wholly unprepared for a multi-continent guerrilla war that saw the sacking and razing of multiple black tributary kingdoms in Siberia and Central Asia, in the ashes of which the Asian invaders settled and imitated them, thus spawning the first primitive Asian kingdoms, shamelessly stealing black customs and traditions as their own. In time, the eminent tribes of Asiatic usurpers would come to be known as the Hwanguk and the Fingolic Khaganate, rising out of their hovels of dung and refuse into a crude mockery of a real civilization. But their story is for another day. See the Fenno-Korean Hyperwar. Though a useful stopgap, the Asiatic model wasn't the ideal fighting force for breaking the Kemetic yoke, as their incomplete genome made them susceptible to finessing, a traditional logic game played by Al-Lunasai youths and continued in their descendants. Thus, there was constant experimentation and prototyping done in Yakub's, praise be upon him, compound, which at this point had to be moved from Scotian to a massive citadel in the area now known as Paris. It was here in this black site that he coined a smorgasbord of methods to supplement the Asian invasion, like a retrofitted offshoot that reincorporated some reverse-engineered black traits into the Asian platform, resulting in the Red Race, a modernised and retrofitted Asian offshoot. Yakub utilised the Asian genome to create a demyelination bomb that would be dropped over Kemetic cities. The result was widespread pineal calcification and melanicide. The survivors of this terror bombing were being mistaken for Asians and as such were being shot on sight by panicked Kemetic gendarmes. Fleeing across the ruins of the Indian subcontinent and the Middle East, their descendants within time became the brown race. It was only when a chance encounter with a local fungus that Yakub, peace be upon him, finally had the breakthrough he desperately needed. As when he noticed this strain of mysterious mushrooms growing on a dead Asian, he noticed that psionic fields were being generated around it, whilst maintaining the psychic dampening effect present in the Oriental troops. This complete accident resulted in the creation of the Shaitan 2 program, prototyping a model of Asian that had its pineal gland cut out entirely and a chunk of fungus X slotted in its place. The result of this was the creation of the Neanderthal, whose fungal implant resulted in aberrant and unexplainable behaviour that would carry on today in the form of autism and other such forms of lateral thinking. The Neanderthal was brought in as an officer class to lead the Asians in strategic manoeuvres. Despite initial successes, their social malformations and lack of insight into finessing resulted in their eventual failures in the first Levantine campaign. This enraged Yakub, peace be upon him, who decided to abduct Kemetic officers, buck-break them and splice their genetics with surviving Neanderthals, resulting in the Shaitan 3 program, or, as you may guess, the creation of the white race. The first generation of white devils were numbered at 6. These cave beasts were unlike anything seen before on the earth, with bone-white skin and protruding noses. These male macaques were personally reared and raised by Yakub in his Patmos citadel as the ultimate soldiers, giving special attention to the art of finessing, which he modified to remove all the gallantry and fairness from to create a crueler variant focused on deceit that we now know as tricknology. These founding 6 whites were then given 110 clones of themselves and told to spread and consolidate themselves across the world, to forever hold down, break and antagonise the black man wherever he may be. As such, the war raged on, with the white man establishing a heartland in Europe and waging an efficient war against the battered and beleaguered Kemetic. Now, why was Kemet getting trashed so badly? Well, you see, they were honourable and loving, creating all culture and all science in existence. They were not capable of the infinite cruelty that the aberrant folk were. As such, they weren't capable of truly eradicating them. Concession after concession befell Kemet, being pushed out of the Middle East into Africa by the displaced brown man, fleeing the roving cannibal gangs of whites and Neanderthals. Eventually, the whites struck a death blow to Kemet when they torched the Black Library of Alexandria, and managed to torch over 700 million years of black history, technology and literature, with whatever remained being stolen and appropriated by the aberrant hordes. Muhammad, now a jaded and aged old man, wisely concluded with a heavy heart that Kemet had fallen, and that indeed billions have and will die. As such, he relocated the nucleus of the nation from the Red Sea, leaving the major hubs of Cairo, Mecca and Sana'a, instead rallying the surviving remnants of humanity in modern-day Katanga in the Congo. However, due to disease, bioweapons and leadership struggles, the Kemetic remnants fractalized and scattered across the continent, losing their sense of self and devolving into a psionically comatose and tribal patchwork, their pineal glands and psionic abilities being locked away for their own safety, and exiling and entombing himself in the Ngwenya mines in modern-day Eswatini, or, as you all know it, Swaziland, with the intention of returning once the time is right and the world is ready for enlightenment. Thus, the reign of the black man had passed, plunging the world into darkness and evil, and the age of the Asian had begun, most famously culminating in what we all know as the Fenno-Korean Hyperwar. As for Yakub, he spent the remainder of his days wiping out pockets of civility across the world. Content with Kemet being contained to the Sub-Sahara, his final act before dying of tetanus was wiping out the remaining black people in Eurasia by releasing what we all now know as the Plague. It was called the Black Death for a reason. Closing out to the modern day, with the evil white paradigm slowly starting to unravel after 1914, as prophesied all those years ago, the black man is destined to return to his rightful throne of unquestioning galactic dominance, as Allah intended before the most arrogant of his children had a tantrum that resulted in the birth of the grand chthonic adversary and subjecting the world to millions of years of war, death, famine, pestilence, and ska music. And thus we end Genesis, and the birth of our master and coconut in chief. He may now be gone, but his legacy lives on today in basically every single group except the mighty Melanoid Masters. Ave Yakub, peace be upon you. Now, was all of the stuff that I just said true, or did I just rip off Halo and several other gaming franchises and splice them into a made-up story because I found it really, really funny? Well, here's the funny thing, it's actually impossible to tell. But I do challenge Tariq Nasheed to debate me on any of it.
It's Count Dankula on YouTube! Everybody subscribe!